stop, Exeter.
Welcome to Next Stop Exeter. I'm Paul Nicholson.
I'm Frank Ferraro.
I'm Ben Belanger.
And I'm Griffin Poutre.
Every other week, Next Stop Exeter will bring you news of Exeter community affairs.
Our intent is to educate and inform the people of Exeter about what's going on in town. This week, we visit opening day at the Farmers Market held at Exeter High School. And from there, we go to St. Vincent dePaul's Community Center to see what's going on at the Community Center.
12 different varieties of dried beans. We make beer down the street in Northampton.
And we're New Hampshire Mushroom Company, and we're located in Tamworth, which is on the way to North Conway.
Typically, we do grass-fed meats. We do grass-fed lamb, grass-fed beef, pasture-raised pork, pasture-raised poultry, and about half of our operation is certified organic vegetables.
Hello, this is Griffin Poutre, and I'm reporting from the St. Vincent dePaul's Community Assistance Center. The St. Vincent dePaul in Exeter is a non-profit organization that has served the residents of Exeter, Brentwood, East Kingston, Kensington, and Stratham for 25 years. They assist more than 3,000 clients per week. The volunteer organization annually distributes the equivalent of $750,000 in food. That's more than 180,000 meals. A recent addition to St. Vincent dePaul's arsenal is this dental care bus, which was recently donated by Exeter Hospital.
Joining us today here in studio is Cleo Gastingway, the president of the St. Vincent dePaul Community Assistance Center. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
So Cleo, tell me a little bit about the history of your organization.
In Exeter, we've been here since 1989, so we're on our 26th year.
So if they're interested in doing this, how do they reach you?
Simple, just walk into the center. We're there open from 8:30 to 4:30 every day.
Excellent, and it's Monday through Friday?
Monday through Friday.
All right.
They can go to our website, which is svdpexeter.com.
Well, Cleo, thank you very much for joining us here in the studio. Cleo Gastingway, doing God's work here in Exeter. Joining us this week is Julie Gilman. Julie Gilman is the chairperson of the Board of Selectmen and is a member of the Exeter Heritage Commission.
The Winter Street Cemetery was the first project that we started in 2011. That's where most of our Revolutionary War veterans are interred. So the Daughters of the American Revolution joined this project that's called Wreaths Across America, where wreaths are provided or gathered by the different entities and all placed on gravestones on the same day across America. And this year we did it for the Revolutionary War veterans that are buried in Winter Street Cemetery.
You may have seen a large marble marker on Front Street with the name Whitefield on it. Well, I've learned it's not Whitefield, it's Whitfield. But that's all I know about that large marble marker. So we've reached out to Barbara Rimkunis, who's the curator of the Exeter Historical Society, to tell us more.
So who was George Whitfield? That's what everybody wants to know about that marker. Well, first of all, it's not any kind of grave marker. He's not buried there. There's no bodies underneath Front Street at that end anyway. George Whitfield was a minister who was born in 1714 in England. Whitfield comes into town and preaches out in the open field. And in 1770, he preaches his last sermon on September 29th here in Exeter. He was headed to Newburyport, and he was enticed to come into town to preach. And he agrees to do this. The second parish church at that time stood on Front Street, where the Dow House is located today. And the morning that he was due to preach, it turns out that there were too many people there. And so they weren't able to have him preach inside the church. So initially he decided he was going to speak on the church steps, except it was morning and the sun was shining right in his face. This is the story as we have gotten it. I don't have any real eyewitness accounts. So they move him across the street to the other side, the opposite side of Front Street, facing the Dow House, which is where the monument's located today. And he preaches on that side of the street. After the sermon was done, he climbed on the horse and went to Newburyport, and in spite of the fact that he had ridden that whole time, it didn't help. And by the next morning, he had died and was buried in the church in Newburyport. And that's our story of George Whitefield.
Welcome to Next Stop Exeter. My name's Paul Nicholson, and joining us in the studio today is Steve Koenig. Steve is the gentleman responsible for the redevelopment of the former Loaf and Ladle space in downtown Exeter. Steve, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
Very interested to find out, me along with many other foodies here in Exeter, about what the future is for that facility.
It's really not that complicated. What we're trying to do there is just the next chapter in the history of that building. It's been a successful restaurant for many, many years. And when I saw that it was available for sale, I checked into it and thought it was a logical investment. Just seemed to be a vital part of the community and a great place to put it in another restaurant.
So the new owner of the Loaf and Ladle hasn't decided who's going to start a restaurant in his building yet, so we thought we'd go out and ask some students what their thoughts were on what kind of restaurant should be in the Loaf and Ladle space.
Well, if there was a restaurant here in town, like, we really need a Sonic. There's only one in Boston, so I would love to have a Sonic here in downtown, like a small version of it.
I know we already have a few of these in the area, but I think a new pizza place downtown, like directly downtown, would be a nice addition.
We also already have a Me and Ollie's, but probably another coffee shop type place would be good because Me and Ollie's is always really crowded.
I'd like to see a really nice Italian restaurant with some nice fettuccine Alfredo here in Exeter to take the spot of Loaf and Ladle.
I was thinking like a smoothie shop, like maybe a Jamba Juice, or not something as like, I don't know, like chain as that, but maybe like a local smoothie shop would be nice.
I would like to see it become more like a Panera, especially because of how good the mac and cheese is.
And I second the smoothie shop idea because there's no smoothie places in the area.
Last summer, events unfolded regarding a family-owned business that transfixed many consumers in New Hampshire and Massachusetts and ultimately caught the attention of the entire nation. The story revolved around two cousins, their family, their legacy, and most importantly, 25,000 employees. Chronicling those events was Exeter's own Jay Childs, president of JBC Communications in Portsmouth. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Jay, I understand that a year ago you came across a story that caught your interest. Tell us a little bit about why you're in this business and how it caught your interest.
Well, probably the early summer of 2013, I was out with a friend of mine who happens to be affiliated with Market Basket, and from time to time we talk about film ideas and ideas that I was thinking of for a documentary, and she said, you know, you really ought to consider doing the story of the Demoulas family and the Market Basket business, and this whole idea of the dichotomy between a friendly, low-cost, efficient running business and this family that's been gripped by turmoil, you know, for over 2 decades.
So what do you entitle this story? What's the name of the movie?
The name of the story is, or the name of the film is Food Fight, Inside the Battle for Market Basket. And we titled it that because we are really taking an on-the-ground, you know, we were on the ground covering the story as it broke for over 40 days during the summer and a little bit before that. It's a little bit more like a teaser, but I think what it really tries to tap into is the emotions and the drama that we witnessed as this saga played out.
Okay. Well, enjoy Food Fight inside the Market Basket story.
Inside the battle for Market Basket.
Okay, thank you.
We have a major disconnect with certain board of directors.
This is going to become a Wall Street company, and our stores are on Main Street.
How long have you been here, sir?
45 years.
And you're prepared to leave?
Absolutely.
You know something, you want a permanent replacement, you start with me, all right? But I'll have a lot of guys next to me.
Sorry, it's too late. We're shutting down.
We'll be back.
We had to eliminate every single part-timer in the building.
Awful lot of people being hurt. When is enough enough?
We want back as a team. We want them back now.
Your president, I can tell you, and your labor secretary are very proud of you. I think your nation is proud of you.
I love you. Love you too, Mary. Everything's going to be good.
Joining me today here in our studios at Exeter High School is local legend Norman Phillips. Norm, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
I've known Norm for several years, and he lived in Exeter up until just recently before relocating to Stratham. And Norm's life story is very compelling, and he was kind enough to join us here in studio to share his story with us. So, Norm, you were born and raised in Massachusetts?
Yes, yeah.
And you entered the military back in the early 40s, correct?
Yes. When World War II came up, I was swept in along with 10 million other young Americans.
And you joined the Army Air Corps?
Air Corps, yeah.
Correct. So that was a choice. You got drafted and you were able to select?
Oh, no, I wasn't drafted. Right after Pearl Harbor, in fact, in January, I went up to Montreal to try to get into the RAF, but they sent me back because we were at war, so I applied to the Army Air Corps, and they took the test, and they allowed me in.
So you were interested in joining the Royal Air Force at one point in time?
Yeah, I thought, I've never flown an airplane, but a friend of mine had just gotten through pilot school, and he inspired me to try to become a pilot. I went to primary, where I flew my first airplane in Helena, Arkansas for 2 months, followed by Newport, Arkansas for basic, and then Craig Field in Alabama for advanced. And then I went to Fort Myers in Florida for 2 months of combat training in the P-47. We got 72 hours in the mighty Jug, and off I went to Italy and ended up in Naples, Italy. And my flying group was located about 15 miles north of Naples. And it was, Rome had not yet been captured,
liberated,
but
yep.
Roughly 3 weeks later, we captured Rome, and we were moved right up to Ciampino, the big air base outside of Rome. By August 1st, we were shipped across the ocean to Corsica on an air base there, and from there we did all our bombing and strafing in Italy and also in southern France, getting ready for the southern France invasion. And the southern France invasion was very early September or the latter part of August. And
of 1944?
Yeah.
Okay.
And after it was invaded, 10 days later, we were at an air base in southern France. And then we continued following the Army because our job was close support for ground troops.
Okay.
Up the Rhone Valley, around Switzerland, and then eventually, April 1st, my fighter group crossed the Rhine River, and we were based in Germany shortly before the war ended.
So while you were over there, in the position that you were in, was there much discussion about targets that were off limits to you? You know, specifically whether they're cultural or anything along the line?
You're bringing up something that is talked about a lot in this generation.
Correct.
I can remember when we were bombing and strafing in Italy. I remember that the Ponte Vecchio bridge going into Florence was off limits. Rome was off limits. We never dive bombed or strafed anything in either of those two places. We were cautioned about the civilian population in Italy, even though at the time they were ostensibly still with the Germans.
Mm-hmm.
But we as pilots learned that if you got shot down, the local populace were very friendly, and they usually sneaked us back across the lines, back to our side. So they were not enemies. Once we got into Germany, things were different. Even in France, things were a little different. You should read this book because it gives quite a detailed account of my combat experience. And in it, I write about the memory of the first time I saw flak. And it's funny, at that age, at that time, I actually looked forward to getting shot at the first time. When I first saw those great big puffs of 88s bursting, I felt good and exhilarated. And later on, of course, you saw them as a threat when they occasionally hit somebody.
Gotcha.
And your attitude, that romantic attitude changed.
So the Vietnam War comes up on the horizon.
Yeah. Oh,
were you interested in sitting behind a desk somewhere in the States?
No, I had spent 4 years in the Pentagon. And after the Pentagon, I was able to almost choose my assignment, and I chose going back to Germany again. I ended up at a base 10 miles from Bitburg, where it was the first time. I was at Spangdahlem, where they had the F-105. So I checked out in the F-105, and I flew that for 3 years.
So for those not familiar, the F-105 is a fighter plane?
Oh, yes. They call it the Thud. It's a Mach 2.1 airplane, and it was a very much used airplane.
With its primary role being what?
Close support, dropping bombs.
So like 2 bombs, 4 bombs, 1 bomb?
Well, usually 6.
6, okay.
Yeah.
So did you lose an airplane while you were over there?
Did I?
Yes.
Well, I got shot down.
You got shot down?
Yes. So this was 1968.
Yep.
And coming back from a mission in North Vietnam, we were crossing Laos, and the air command post, there's a big transport airplane loaded with people with radar screens and radios that takes care of what's going on. They called and said, anybody with a little fuel, there's a truck we've got spotted. So myself and another guy in this formation of 12 peeled off, and we found the truck, and the other pilot hit it, and it was burning, and I said, well, I'll hose the sides of the road in case the crew jumped out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in a nice hard turn looking at that target and not taking evasive action because it's been very quiet there. Just the rolling green landscape of the Laotian jungle, and all of a sudden, brrr, a handful of like Roman candle like that, boom! Red lights come on, and I was on fire, and so I pulled up, and the airplane went out of control finally, and I bailed out. And then, of course, I went crashing through the trees, So eventually the chopper gets over me, and I see through the jungle, I can see the guy coming down the cable, and then he disappears in the undergrowth about, well, let's say 15 or 20 yards away. And I'm yelling at him, but with the noise of the chopper and all the branches going, it's like screaming in a hurricane. You can't be heard. And I looked to the left, and I saw him, this camouflage-clad guy with makeup on his face and an AK-47 walking up there. Then he came on this side. I said, boy, he's making a circular pattern right around me. That's what they do. He's going to get back that cable and leave. So I had a 38, so I pulled my 38 out, and I fired 2 rounds across the nose of the chopper. And a pilot's rescue firearm, the first 2 rounds are tracer rounds for signaling. So they work. Well, the chopper pilot sees the tracers, he thinks it's enemy, and he roared off with 125 feet of cable dangling, which promptly snagged in the trees, snarled around his wheels, and his hoist system was out. So the gunship had to come down and replace him. They put the cable down, but they weren't a rescue chopper, so they put down too much cable. And of course, when the chopper left, I was able to yell at the young airman, and he came to me and he started to take care of me. And he was putting me on the penetrator, and the big loop of cable started to close. I said, look out, they're putting, caught him by the ankle, and up he went through the trees, dangling by one ankle.
Upside down?
Upside down. So we both, he was screaming on his radio because he had a radio on a lanyard tied to his wrist, and I rolled over on mine, and my arm was broken, and I couldn't squeeze the trigger, but I pressed it between my knees like that, and I said, you got your airman by the leg, let him down. They started him down, and he fell out the last 20 feet or so. So he cracked his arm, and his leg was cut, but he got to me, put me on the penetrator, and then they pulled us up.
What happens next? You're being pulled into a helicopter.
Oh, yeah. Well, I decided, I retired from the Air Force then. I didn't have to, but I decided to.
So you brought with you a bag with something that was special to you in it. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, I think this is kind of interesting. This, if you can see it or not, this rather pinkish fabric is part of a monk's robe, and the wire with the little pieces of stone and brass and whatnot were a necklace worn by a young Thai man who was mandatorily had to spend a year as a monk, and he wore that as a monk. And he worked in our personal equipment area where he helped pilots on with their heavy parachutes and everything. And he had wrapped this necklace up in this piece of monk's cloth, and he had it wrapped with string, and he put it in my flight suit over my heart, and he said, if you wear this, you will be able to see the end of the war. And our losses were very high, so I didn't think much of it then. In fact, not until I got home, probably at least a year later after I got home, I opened up my flight suit and unzipped it and unraveled that, and the little necklace began to have some meaning for me, so I framed it and I hung it on the wall.
Well, Norm, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It was a great honor, a great privilege to have you part of Next Stop Exeter. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I know it's like a meat, but that smells good.